Yo, what's going on YouTube? This is Bro Man Clash right here, and if you know me in person, if you know me personally, I'm a man of, Black history. I love my history. And today marks a very special day in Black history. This marks the day that the lovely Dr. King was born. And I know some of you may say, like, Dr. King's a male, why'd you call him, lovely and all that crap? Let me tell you the reason why I call him, a great individual, and he has a lot of heart because he had enough courage to stand up there and speak, and he inspired many other people. But I want to go off on a limb, and some people really think that Dr. King's birthday is also Dr. Martin Luther King Day. They're two entirely separate days, just in case you were wondering. Some people, I remember when I was younger, I got the thing mixed up myself, so I want to clear that up a bit. But let's talk about a bit about Dr. King. He's a man. He preached nonviolence. He talked about forgiveness. He talked about how the way you should look at people and look at them with equality. But in his tactics, I'm not trying to say he was a bad guy for doing this, but he also revealed that even if you are kind, people will still treat you like shit because you just look differently than them, you act differently from them, you even are differently from them. And just because you are different and people still treat you like shit, be the bigger man and just say, you know what, man, this is how the way I am. I'm not even gonna try to retaliate with violence. But there's a difference between violence and self-defense. And Dr. King, I ain't gonna lie to you, man. A beautiful individual because he at least had enough courage to stand up and speak. And people, he's. It seems to me like he's starting to fade a little bit into obscurity because not many people really know about him that much. And funny enough, you know, when you look at Dr. King, people think like he's somewhat like the face of the civil rights movement, even though there were like other people that came either before, during his time, and definitely after his time. I'm not trying to say like Dr. King is like, the granddaddy of the civil rights era, but at the same time, we should respect him because at the same time, because, he's also been known to speak, he's been known to talk about the injustices that were going on in America. And they only highlight the fact that he was talking about, the I Have a Dream speech. But it's sad that even when, like, after all this time, with the I Have a Dream speech, people have forgotten its message. They remember the messenger, but not the message, especially when it comes down to unity. And if you want to talk about, Dr. King's message, he was talking about unity and coming together. That's the beautiful thing about it. He was not afraid to talk about topics such as racism. He's not afraid to talk about, topics of American hypocrisy against, the people of color. He was not afraid to talk about war. He was not afraid to talk about anything, you know. Sure, maybe at first he was a little bit shaky because he was concerned about the well-being of his people. But when it came right down to, the life of his people, he considered it very important because he loved them. He even loved the see. Look, he looked at Malcolm X and he said, "That's a man right there." You know, understandably, some people may say like, "Why are you bringing up Malcolm X with Dr. King? Isn't it supposed to be Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday today?" Because let me bring up the reason why I'm bringing up Malcolm X. It's not. Maybe it might be partially due to the fact that I look up I look up to Malcolm X highly as well, a little bit more than Dr. King, especially when he was uncompromising. But the reason why I'm bringing up Malcolm X because him and Dr. King were actually two heads or like heads and tails on the same coin. They both want the advancement of their people. Malcolm X may have disagreed with some of Dr. King's tactics, but I believe he respected Dr. King more than enough to say, you know what, man? If this is what he thinks is right, then let him be. Malcolm X believed, Dr. King believed in the same thing about Malcolm X. But then, when we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday, especially when today's the day, and how it's kind of like forgotten, man. And it's just like, man, sure, we may remember the day and the messenger, but we have forgotten the message. And some of us would rather use that message and twist it and corrupt it so it could benefit them instead of actually improving ourselves. And then when I look at Dr. King, I look at him, some people would say like he was an Uncle Tom, but still, he was never an Uncle Tom. He was just wise. Malcolm X, in all purposes and intent, he was more aggressive. He was like more straightforward. But Dr. King, you know, I'm not trying. He was more like a person who would actually talk about things with a deeper meaning than they should have, and then it actually appears. He was talking about peace, but he was talking about unity. But the thing about Dr. King, especially today's his very great day, is the fact that Dr. King was addressing with all people, but more importantly, he was addressing it to the American black, the American African, even though technically we're not even considered to be citizens. I mean, come on, we were looked at as less than human to the point like you got like so-called civilized people sicking dogs on us, like back then, and treating us like property. Hell, even though this may not happen in American soil, but some of the okay, it did happen in American soil, I believe. Like they had slaves without anesthesia, cutting them open, believing that they're less than human, or they were like superhuman to the point like they can handle labor, but they thought they were less than human in terms of thinking. And then you got these so-called civilized people with savage minds trying to tell you that this man was nothing more than just a crook, and try to tell other people that like Dr. King, he was too soft. He wasn't soft. He had enough courage to stand up there and speak on topics that were otherwise considered to be taboo. And you want to know the real funny thing is the fact that he had courage. He had courage. He was the message. But it's just sad the fact that we look at the face of the messenger, but not the life essence that the messenger portrayed. Not portrayed, but exuded. And it's very sad that, people don't even look at the message that he was portraying, that he was giving out. Ignore portray, giving out is more better. It's much better because, he was talking about, unity. He was talking about being organized. He was talking about less discrimination and more unification. Some people did follow Dr. King's dream and learned the message and understood what the premises about it. But we have a long way to go. I understand that it was around what, like 50. It's gonna be like, I believe this year, like in a few more years, it's gonna no. This year marks the 50th anniversary since Malcolm X was assassinated. But I believe this year or the upcoming years are gonna mark the 50th anniversary since the "I Have a Dream" speech. And when it comes to like "I Have a Dream" and how the way people, they think that they were just pretty words, but if you really look at how the way it encompass the lives of those who were touched by it, you will understand that Dr. King's legacy was more important and much more precious than you actually think, because Dr. King's legacy showed off that he was not afraid to speak a different tone. He was for the unification of his people. Sure, his tone may have been more passive, and Malcolm X's was more aggressive, but at the same time, him and Malcolm X could put away their differences aside and say, you know what? This is what we need to do. We need to talk about something that can actually benefit our people and make sure that they are safe from harm. And you want to know what the real sad part is? It's the fact that people actually thought like Malcolm X and Dr. King were entirely two different spectrums on on two different sides of the spectrum when they were in fact very close. That's the reason why Malcolm X and Dr. King can go hand in hand. But I love Dr. King, because of the message that he was portraying. Man, he's a beautiful individual. I mean, come on, man. Who had enough courage to stand up there and speak their minds, and especially about topics that people were were scared to talk about, even to the point that it was taboo. Speaking about the Vietnam War, speaking about what America owes to the American Negro, or African stolen to America. And is it talks about like a mental image that America wasn't exactly perfect, and it still isn't. We still face discrimination to this very day. And sad enough, those who preach Dr. King's speech don't even know its true meaning. But those who understand it in silence will understand that the true meaning of the speech was more than just pretty words, more than just a rhetoric. It was a life. It preached about live. It didn't preach. It taught. It teaches. It makes sure that, hey, this is what we gotta do, and if we gotta survive. But it seems as if people have forgotten about the teachings of living, to the point that they would rather die than to live. And when you look at that, and when you look at how the way people actually look at Dr. King, they may hold him in high revere, but they don't understand the message. Dr. King, you know, he looked at, the good side of America. See, he may have won, like, he may have been nominated or won a Nobel Peace Prize, but at the same time, he met his untimely demise back in April 21st, 1968, if I'm correct. And that was also like a very tragic time, because like 3 years prior to that, Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21st. And then, when you look at all those dates and you look at the legacy that they left behind, and you look at now and how the way we don't even know our own heroes. And this goes on to the topic of, why can't we remember our heroes? Why can't we remember the message that they were portraying? Why can't we remember the rap that they were speaking? And trust me, it wasn't rap like you hear on these bullshit radios. They were talking about actual topics. The rhetoric that they were speaking was very strong. And the fact that it's just that it's just more infuriating, to the point, like, it just makes me think, like, wait, you mean to tell me that you've forgotten the fact that these people sacrificed their lives? They died. They were not afraid to get hurt. They were not afraid to look at their enemy in the eye and say, look, this is what we believe in. This is what we gotta do. And if you don't like it, then we could just talk about it another way. But some of us are more rowdy than others. And then when you talk about Dr. King, you don't talk about a man. You talk about a legacy. And it seems as if like some of us are forgetting about the legacy more than we should. And the real sad part is the fact that when you forget about Dr. King's legacy, you also forget a little bit of yourself. And when you look at the legacy that's not portrayed, but looked towards and actually felt like, you know what, man, Dr. King spoke on certain topics, but yet it seems as if those topics have not reached the hearts of everyone, especially here in America, because hypocrisy still reigns. And then when you talk about American topics, you realize that there are more hypocritical statements than there are actual changes. There were many false promises, but not many real promises kept. And then when you look at America, you realize that, just like Dr. King once said, it's nothing more than just a bounced check. And the real sad part is the fact that when that reality check comes in, America just locks the safe. Make sure reality doesn't come in through the illusion. And you wanna know the sad part is? Reality has a way of slipping through the cracks, no matter how tight the safe is. And it's just very funny the fact that people don't really talk about, heroes, especially black heroes, who actually died, sacrificed, did brilliant things for their people. It seems as if like that's I heard this before, and I could understand the meaning behind this now. They say this, they treat black men like we're going out of style. And then once you hear that, and then you hear, you know, why, black heroes are not being talked about, why black folks are being disrespected, and why they won't really talk much about Dr. King, why they won't talk about much about, Malcolm X, why they won't talk about much about Marcus Garvey, why they won't talk about Frederick Douglass, why they won't talk about Booker T. Washington, why they don't talk about W.E.B. Du Bois, why they don't talk about, Harriet Tubman, Madam C.J. Walker, Sarah Boone, Garrett Morgan, Carter G. Woodson, all these heroes, all these myriad of heroes that came before and some of them a little bit after, unknown heroes. And then, there was still Ruby Dee, there was Ozzie Davis, they were participants in the civil rights era. I bet you some people didn't tell you that, or you had to find that out on your own. And then, when you talk about topics like this, some people would just be like, you know what, man, you're just bringing up old memories of racism. What are you trying to do? Cause another problem? Hiding the problem and solving the problem are two different things. And how's this tying with Dr. King? Because he would shed light on those things, on those topics. He was not afraid to talk about those topics, which is very beautiful. Hence why I call him a beautiful man. And he inspired me to be? He inspired me to be more peaceful. He inspired me to not be passive, but to be intelligent. He inspired me to analyze the situation and understand people instead of just shooting off my mouth. I've forgotten about that briefly for quite some periods of time. But at the same time, what he taught me? He taught me how to be compassionate. And to look at Dr. King's birthday and to forget about the message that he was portraying, not even portraying, teaching. I'm sorry if I'm saying betraying, portraying. But when it comes right down to Dr. King, you cannot, I repeat, cannot forget what he was talking about. Because as soon as you forget, that's when you fall. Especially if you are a black person in America, because that is a part of our history. As shameful as slavery was, as much as we hated the fact that we were enslaved, the fact that we have been robbed of our name, robbed of our language, our culture, our religion, our God, shit, even some of our minds have been lost. But, when I look at people who don't even know their own history, who don't even know how the way we were brutalized by the government, how the way the very same people who told us follow these laws were also breaking the laws, were also breaking our necks. And then the absolute nerve of some people to talk about and to say hey, forget about the past is the past, we don't want to talk about it. But the real sad fact is the fact that if you forget about your past, if you don't even learn or reap the fruits that it has grown, you're just going to get what the hell you deserve. And those who, sadly repeat the mistakes that happened back then, it's going to catch up with us now. And you can quite clearly see, with Ferguson, with Staten Island, with Tamar Rice, And you know, with all these other people who are getting killed, and some of the news is not being portrayed or being shown. But then, you know, some of you are asking, how does this all tie in with Dr. King? Because Dr. King would talk about these topics. He would talk about, look, this is what's going on. And if y'all don't like it, then hey, look, we got to push forward for change. For me, Dr. King, he may not have been an elected official, but he's like one of the few people I could consider to be like a legitimate, no, not even an elected official, but the way I look at Dr. King, Malcolm X, and how the way I look at my leaders, I look at them at a very high regard. Those leaders, especially, especially Malcolm X, Dr. King, especially Marcus Garvey, Frederick Douglass, those are straight up leaders. They were men. They were men that were not afraid to speak on topics. And to forget about them is to forget about us. Hey, and also for women, you know, Harriet Tubman, Coretta Scott King, Betty Shabazz, hey, and also Madam C.J. Walker, Rosa Parks, and also, you know, Little Rock Nine, you know, females of Little Rock Nine, Arkansas. You know, there were other myriad of other leaders and innovators, you know, people who took that big leap and said, you know what, enough is enough. We're going to destroy the stereotype now. Because, you know, the stereotype of the black man back then, and especially now, dumb, ignorant, scared, afraid to take risks, don't even know how to own their own business, afraid, you know, don't even know how to be in office. We all know those were just a bunch of bullshit lies. And, you know, let's not forget about Dr. King, man, especially on his day. You know, today is his birthday. We need to talk about, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King on his birthday because, you know, if we forget about Dr. King, we forget a little bit about ourselves. And it's just sad that some people remember the face but forget the message. And the ones that forget the message are also the ones that want you to forget because they feel as if it will be in your best interest. But what is their best interest? That's the main question. And the real sad part is the fact that not many people realize this, but in order for change to happen, we have to look back and realize what were the things that were done to keep us in bound. What were the things that kept us in bound? That was the correct phrasing. Sorry about that. It's just I'm a bit passionate. But you know, you have to remember, you have to respect, you know, black leaders. You know, respect any type of leader as long as he stood for something righteous. Because there were many crooked leaders out there that will say, oh, I stand for righteousness. No, they stand for a dollar bill and the fact that they want to be in power. Some of these individuals, they stood up for a purpose. They stood up because they were men, they were women, they were leaders. They were not afraid to speak on this topic. They were not afraid to speak in general. That's why I respect them. And Dr. King, I respect you as well. Because you know why? Because you are a man. Not were, you are. Because your physical essence may not be there anymore, but mentally your message is still there. You still speak. Your breath is still within us. I don't care what anybody says. You have a significance in our history. Love you, respect you. This is Bro Man Class. I want to say all this because this was on my mind. But at the same time, I gotta say, look, I gotta go. Hope y'all have a great evening or great morning, depending on which part of the world you're in. This is Bro Man Class. Signing out at one. Later.